lot of the founding fathers were against reservations.
I have a slightly different take.
No politician is going to dare to touch them because he's instantly fried.
Discrimination against the scheduled castes has ended, has still not arrived in India.
He's a major advocate of reservations. Even within reservations, it's possible to promote merit.
What do you really mean by merit? Reservations are not contrary to merit.
I'm just curious, whatever happened to that thinking?
I don't think India has come to that level at all.
Dr. Tharoor, you note how reservations originally envisioned by Dr. Ambedkar, and as you quote, were a temporary corrective, but today have become politically untouchable. I'm from GLC myself, and 50%, more than 50% of seats are reserved, and we work with this IIMUN's network with so many young people. We hear this quite often, and there is a growing concern that merit is often being compromised in the names of reservation. Do you believe India can ever move beyond reservations, or are they too entrenched in vote bank politics?
I think they're very, very entrenched. In fact, the irony is a lot of the founding fathers were against reservations, including Mr. Nehru, who's written about it in letters to chief ministers, saying why he's opposed to reservations. There's even a debatable proposition, I don't want to get into it, about whether Dr. Ambedkar wanted at the end of 10 years the reservations to continue or not. But the fact of the matter is they're here to stay. In America, I don't know how many of you have knowledge of this, but the American subway system, the underground subway system in America, has 3 rails. There are 2 rails on which the train runs. And in between, there is a 3rd rail, which generates the electricity on which the train runs. Now, if you accidentally touch the 3rd rail, you're instantly electrocuted. Reservations are the 3rd rail of Indian politics. No politician is going to dare to touch them because he's instantly fried. So the result is, very, very seriously, that whatever intellectual disagreements and discussions you may have, when even sort of the great-grandson of Mr. Nehru is a major advocate of reservations in our politics today, I think those who may have intellectual difficulties with this notion will have to sit back and say, this we can't touch, we have to work within it and try and ensure the promotion of merit with it. I mean, I've been advocating for a long time, for example, that many of the sort of underprivileged communities, underprivileged by either class or caste or gender or religion, should actually be getting also another kind of affirmative action. Extra courses, remedial instruction, a leg up, extra coaching, for example, on how to take examinations. How you can get, for example, people into the police, into the army, into in fact, even the central services, by encouraging them to be able to take advantage of the opportunities available to them through merit. So even within reservations, it's possible to promote merit, but you need to encourage it because a lot of people need that extra help.
Your Lordship Justice, what is your advice to the government on going about this? Has the time come to reevaluate the structure and scope of reservations, not to weaken affirmative action, but to ensure it remains fair and relevant?
I have a slightly different take on reservations, which was your question. Reservations were introduced in India in the backdrop of centuries of discrimination against the marginalized groups in our society, who did not, by the way, constitute a minority, but constitute the majority of the country. That's the difference, say, between India and the US. Now, the idea, therefore, was through reservations and affirmative action to mainstream them into Indian public life, in Indian social life. The Constitution itself was not just an instrument for the transfer of political power from a colonial to an independent Indian regime, but an instrument of social transformation. So there were 2 parallel movements which were going on when the Constitution was drafted. And reservations in that sense proceed on the postulate that you can have a stable polity, you can have a stable society when all elements of the society, including those who have been historically discriminated against for centuries, are brought into the mainstream of discourse. Now, we have to ask ourselves this question. Can we say today, 75 years after the Constitution has been adopted, that discrimination against, say, the marginalized communities, the scheduled castes, the scheduled tribes in particular, has ended after 75 years? And the answer to that would be clearly in the negative. you still have students who commit suicide, Dalit students who have committed suicide in the IITs or in different institutions. So which means that the time where you can say that discrimination against the scheduled castes has ended has still not arrived in India. India still faces that. Having said that, judicially, there has been a number of very innovative approaches to reservation. One of the decisions which we rendered as part of the Constitution bench was on this issue of subclassification. Can a state government subclassify the scheduled castes which are notified by Parliament or the President, as the case may be, so as to confine or give benefits to the most backward amongst them? The Supreme Court said yes. There's nothing in the Constitution which would prevent a state government from identifying those castes which are truly backward and then ensuring that benefits go to them, so that the benefits are not really absorbed by the most forward amongst the backward communities. So we've permitted that. The other reservation in India is for the socially and educationally backward classes of citizens, the OBCs as we call them. That's how the Constitution calls them. Now, we've applied the creamy layer doctrine to reservations for the socially and educationally backward classes of citizens, which means that the most affluent amongst the socially and educationally backward classes of citizens are excluded from the benefit of reservations. The final point which I want to make on this, of course, you can spend a whole afternoon discussing this, is on what do you really mean by merit? Does merit mean, for instance, the scores which you clock on the NEET, National Eligibility Exam Entrance Test for medical admissions, or in the CLAT, the Common Law Aptitude Test? The reason why merit cannot be reflected in the scores which you have on the raw scores in these tests, is that the raw scores which students attain in these tests are themselves the product of your cultural and social capital. The best students the students who generally score the best are those who have access to coaching classes, who have command over English. There are, of course, exceptions to this. But therefore, if you define merit not in terms of your ability to score in examinations, but merit in terms of inclusion, of the ability of our society to give responsible positions in governance to different segments of society, that is what defines merit, then reservations are not contrary to merit, but they in fact further merit, because it allows for people, whether they become IAS officers, whether they become IPS officers, doctors, an equal share of social development. Otherwise, what is happening even today, Anjani, is this, that if you look at the representation of the scheduled caste, for instance, you will find a lot of representation or improved representation at the lowest levels, class 4 posts. When you come to the top posts, the most important positions of responsibility, you'd find them lacking even today. The same thing in the case of women, for instance. Now, where do you find... So therefore, I think, of course, Dr. Ambedkar believed that, reservations initially should be valid for 10 years. But I do believe that for India to maintain the sense of social harmony, the social equilibrium, and I see the flip side, as you said in the law college, 50% of the seats are reserved. And I see the flip side from the point of view of a person belonging to a non-reserved community. But looking at it from an overall national perspective, I still do believe that reservations in India have been a very potent source of maintaining this social equilibrium, where we brought all segments of the community and given them an opportunity for personal growth and development and social growth and development as well.
I agree with all that. Can I just ask you a question, Dhananjay, on a very important aspect of this? In 2015, Justices Gogoi and Nariman, neither of them was a Chief Justice at the time, came up with a judgment on the Jat reservation case, where they actually declared that birth into a particular category would no longer be sufficient for the Supreme Court to permit reservations, and they wanted the government to come back with a matrix of disabilities that would entitle a person to reservations. Now, curiously, Gogoi went on to become a CJI, never referred to his own judgment again. I believe he was the principal author of it. And subsequently, of course, Nariman had a distinguished career. You've had reservation-related cases coming before you, I've never seen another reference to this argument that, and the government has never come up with a matrix anyway, that you could actually make reservations and merit and all of these things something that is subject to a greater set of considerations than mere birth into a caste or a community alone. That you would have, let's say, you could have points for being a single mother, earning a certain level of income, being from a certain caste or community, being whatever, all of those things. And then, depending on that, you would qualify or not for reservation. That's what I understood by the language of that judgment. I'm just curious, whatever happened to that thinking?
The moment you talk about these other metrics, then you are substituting the very foundation of the reservation policy in India. Which is, no, it is not necessarily good. Now, we have reservations under the EWS category, the economically weaker sections, where you apply a pure economic criterion. Mm-hmm. But you can't really subsume reservations only under the economically weaker sections category. Because in some communities, birth within that community is itself a source of discrimination. Even in the India today, if you go to the villages, birth within that caste or community is a very potent source of discrimination. Now, what the government has done, which is by bringing in the recent constitutional amendment, is to also allow for reservations to the EWS category, which is really to say that in the non-reserved categories, namely the non-SC, ST, OBC categories as well, there may be people who would be economically underprivileged and who should also be given a certain degree of reservation, which is a different basis altogether of reservation. But to apply that criterion to castes which are fundamentally underprivileged would really take away the whole social basis of the reservation policy. And I still do believe that India has not still come to that point where we can say that, well, all communities are equally, or all castes are equally situated, and therefore we can end reservation. I don't think India has come to that level at all.